Welcome, Diana. It's a great privilege to have you with us to share your knowledge and wisdom. For those of us in this research community, of course, your reputation precedes you. You're a world authority on the Balkan conflicts, a doyen of European journalism. But for the benefit of new viewers, a few biographical notes would be in order, I think. You're an American who grew up in New Deal, Washington, in a very political household. Both your parents were distinguished academics who worked for the government. You yourself have a doctorate in French literature, a degree in Russian studies, and you live in France. You spent half your working life in Europe as a political observer and journalist, reporting for AFP, Agence France Presse. You were European editor of the Progressive News magazine in these times, press officer for the Green Group in the European Parliament, and a prominent peace campaigner. You've witnessed and chronicled the Second World War, the Cold War, the collapse of communism, the march of globalization, and the never-ending wars waged by the United States in pursuit of world domination. Your account of the Balkan Wars, the Fool's Crusade, has become a standard text. The late, great John Pilger called you a superb reporter of a kind and caliber that barely exists today. Your 2020 autobiography, Circle in the Darkness, Memoir of a World Watcher, was praised by him as principled and elegant, bracing in its truth in an age of deceit. And interestingly, you've always referred to yourself as an independent seeker after truth. Now in your 90s, we're glad to see you're clearly still highly active, and we're delighted to have you with us. So once again, a very warm welcome. Yes. Let's get started. The old saying that truth is rarely pure and never simple is especially true, I think, of the Balkans. How did you begin to get to grips with the infinite complexity of this part of the world?
It began because I was a major in Russian area studies. And as a student at that time, it was the Cold War. Going to Russia or to one of the Soviet bloc countries was not that easy. So I spent most of 1953 in Yugoslavia, which was, of course, an independent country, and where I lived for a while in a student dormitory in Belgrade. And there in a room with 8 girls, including me, and became very good friends with these people. And some of these friendships lasted as long as they have. I mean, I've outlived everybody now. But my closest friend there was Angela Dotlic, who subsequently married Sveta Stojanovic, who was quite a prominent intellectual in Yugoslavia. He was professor of philosophy. He was a guest speaker in the United States, Germany, probably UK. I think he was one of the Praxis group. He had an international reputation, and he, of course, knew his own country quite well. And because I had these friendships, when everything started to fall apart in the early 90s, I got on the telephone with my friends who I had seen at intervals in between, and they said, it's not at all the way it's being reported. And so I was warned about the fact that this was not true. And then I got in touch with some Yugoslavs in Paris who were publishing a journal of Yugoslavs together. I was at that time I was working in the European Parliament as press officer of the Green Group, so I could not go to Yugoslavia right away at that time. I went later, but I couldn't go initially. And so I started to do research, and one of the first things I looked up was the Serbian memorandum, Academy of Serbia memorandum, because it was being reported in the press as a sort of Serbian declaration of going to commit genocide against everybody else. So the first thing I wanted to see that document. And so I got in touch with a group of Yugoslavs in Paris who were publishing a magazine called Dialogue, and they had published that document. So I read the document, and it was not like that at all. So that was first sort of my beginning of seeing that the newspapers were totally, in the media, was totally lying about this situation, because it was a document that was actually never official, and it didn't really matter. It was just an appraisal of a situation. And but it was being already from the very beginning, they were presenting anything of the Serbs as some genocidal plot against the rest of Yugoslavia. And then, of course, it goes on. The lies simply accumulate. And I think it was 1992, I'm not sure, the Dobrica Josic, who was a leading Yugoslav Serbian writer, was for a short time president, and he came to the European Parliament to testify before their Foreign Relations Committee. And it turned out that he was accompanied by my old friend, Sveta Stojanovic. So I was able to talk with Sveta at length afterwards. But what was interesting about that hearing is that here was the president of, and nobody asked him any constructive questions. It was just, how many crimes have you, that sort of thing. And there was a very fierce German woman named Doris Pack, who was sort of a forerunner of the German women we see today, Ursula von der Leyen and so on, who was sort of fanatically anti-Serb, as they're anti-Russian today. And so it was very clear that these Europeans were not looking for solutions. They were looking to incriminate Serbs. It was very, very obvious. And so I'm saying that this was my early warning signal to what happened subsequently.
I was going to say that what makes the slander of the entire Serb nation so unconscionable, it seems to me, is their heroic and historic record of defending Europe against Islamic fundamentalism for centuries and against fascism in two world wars. And they've really been traduced, haven't they?
Oh, I think it's terrible because, in fact, I suppose I can't really say this quite because I don't know all the other Balkan nations so well, particularly Greece, of course, is a special case. But certainly in that context, the Serbs were outstanding for their desire to be Western, liberal. They they were really emulating France, Britain, and this constant statement that they are traditional allies of the Russians. Well, that's true, but they were also the traditional allies of the French.
Yes.
And in Calamignan Park, there's this famous monument to France. We love France as France loved us in World War One. And so there's a terrible betrayal, from my mind, on the part of the Western nations that had understood and had supported Serbia's modernization in every sense, intellectually, politically, and they have instead turned to support for the most reactionary, backward people. And I think this has been something that traumatizes Serbs to be betrayed like that by the West that they thought they were part of. I think that psychologically this has been terrible because I think it has sort of traumatized the Serbian people, this betrayal of being treated as this horrible villains, as the new Nazis or something, when it's so obviously the opposite of the truth.
I was going to say, this is the supreme irony, isn't it? That they are victims of the Goebbels' big lie, the Nazi lie, and it is simply stuck because it's been repeated so often.
Absolutely. And it keeps being repeated. And of all the, this was both my introduction to big lies, but also it's a lie that is still damaging. It's a permanent lie, and it's politically used today to justify the worst things that are being done by the West, um, especially by the United States. It's the war against Iraq is largely discredited uh, these days, but unfortunately, I mean, tragically, disastrously, the lies about Yugoslavia have never been corrected in the public. They go on as official truth.
And yet, extraordinarily, I mean, they never laid a glove on Milosevic in terms of him being a proponent or advocate of the Greater Serbia. It was admitted by the court that they couldn't find the evidence. And Carla Del Ponte at the end said that there was no evidence of genocide in Kosovo. These facts are out there that they couldn't make a basic case against him. And yet it persists. The official narrative has yet to be dismantled. Now, why is it so persistent?
Well, I can go back to the fact that after the United States uh, failed to win in Vietnam, of course, they caused huge damage to the country. They killed countless people and destroyed a lot, but they didn't win. And from then on, the United States uh, abandoned, for the most part, Iraq is a bit different, but it largely switched, and especially in Yugoslavia, to the the tactic or strategy of letting them fight, get them to fight, to and then on the name of human rights, go in on one side against the other. Get them to fight and decide on one side there's the good side, which we are supporting, and then there's the bad side, and then it's their fight, and we're just saving people, we're just rescuing people. And then add to that, there's the huge influence of the Holocaust as sort of the one event that everybody in the West has heard of. If they don't know anything about history, they've heard about the Holocaust and how terrible it was. So everything is done on the Holocaust model. There's a wicked dictator like Hitler who wants to kill his own people. And they say that all the time. Here's Milosevic who wants to kill uh, people in Yugoslavia, and later there's Gaddafi who wanted to kill people, and then and it goes on like that, and then and the main purpose is that the Yugoslav war really justified. It gave the model for the ongoing wars. As on this model, but it also is the justification because it's presented as the proof that a war can be good and humanitarian, and so it's become a part of the dogma that justifies U.S. and NATO aggression everywhere.
But why on earth didn't the Western media? We pride ourselves on being free and probing, and where were all, especially you've made a point in your book, where was the left? Where was the conscience, if you like, of people? Why did they swallow this line when it was so patently against the grain of history in a way?
Well, they didn't know anything about Yugoslavia, for one thing. And I think I've mentioned this in my writings, but you see, I had been in Kosovo also when I was a student. I had seen Kosovo over the years, and I had a familiarity with that region. And also, I still at that point spoke a bit of the language and was going around talking to people. And in 1998, before the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, I was in Serbia and in Kosovo. And I wrote a couple of articles, one sort of about the Serbs there, one about and I offered them to in these times, for which I had been their European correspondent, and also to the Nation, whose editor had asked me to write for them. I got no response from the Nation, and the In These Times had some young editors right out of journalism school, and they wouldn't touch it because it didn't say the same thing that CNN was saying. I mean, really, the mainstream press really got hold of this, and this alternative press, which doesn't have the money or the means that the others do, here they had somebody there who had experience, and they were afraid to go against the line because of human rights. You see, it's very intimidating. Uh, it seemed that the claim of human rights was what was so effective. And this is one reason that the war in Yugoslavia didn't have the opposition that the war in Iraq, because the war in Iraq was on a more classic pretext that they're a threat, which they weren't. But I mean, it's a pretext, and that didn't have the appeal to the left that saving people from a murderous dictator had. This left-wing approach of the human rights was something that silenced leftist opposition, it seems to me.
It's very interesting. I mean, I was reading George Kennan, who was running the State Department in 1948, and he came out with a policy paper saying that we should cease to talk about vague and unreal objectives such as human rights, the raising of living standards, and democratization. The day is not far off when we will have to deal in straight power concepts. It seems to me that immediately after the Second World War, there was a strain of thought which basically said realpolitik is what it's all about. And there doesn't appear to be any great wedded sort of commitment to human rights and things in what he said there.
No. So you see, but the ideological pretext for armaments, especially armaments, because that's the main thing. I mean, let's say that armaments are a key to all of this.
Good for business.
The arms industry is the one thing that the stock market that can always count on. You see, if you invest in something nice, you might lose your money. But if you invest in arms, the government is going to pay you a profit. It's a sure thing for investors. And that is what makes the military spending so attractive. It's a guaranteed profit, which you don't get if you go to make shoes or build houses or anything else. And so but the pretext for the arms build up after the Cold War was communism. This was greatly exaggerated because the Russians, they never had any intention of invading anybody. They were trying to recover from the war themselves. And their faults they had were internal faults. They weren't going to bother anybody about it. But after the collapse, that's why after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they had to find a different pretext to keep the arms business going. And the new pretext was that there are these bad leaders out there. We have to be prepared to defeat them and save people from this evil.
And so we get the repurposing of NATO to be an offensive organization rather than the purely defensive one its charter says it should be.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. And that was exactly, to my mind, the immediate purpose of that. There were other purposes involved, but the immediate purpose was that saved NATO from obsolescence because there was no Soviet and there was no enemy around. So they needed a new raison d'etre, a new reason to exist. And they distorted and lied about the situation in Yugoslavia to create this opportunity for NATO to take on its new life.
There's quite a lot going on between 92 and the mid 90s. I mean, James Baker famously said, "We don't have a dog in that fight," referring to the whole Bosnia conflict. And then you get Anthony Lake, National Security Advisor, saying that Bosnia is a cancer eating away at, at our foreign policy, and it's making us look less than credible. Um, can you tell us what you think happened in those early years?
Well, in the early years, it started out, I think, with Germany's uh, support for Croatia and Slovenia succeeding from Yugoslavia, because these had been German influenced areas. I mean, I know, of course, this was Germany. It was very funny because as long as Germany was divided, and I know this very well from all the time I spent in Germany, we had a new generation. Germans just love peace. They just want to. They were all against enemy images. We must not hate anybody. We must love everybody. And the moment they were not unified, but that West Germany had taken East Germany, they immediately became very aggressive against the Serbs, which were the traditional enemy from World War One, and started supporting, which they had been doing. Some associations have been doing that before. The aspirations of Croatia and Slovenia to leave Yugoslavia, but that of course was the beginning. It was really German aggressivity that started it off, and then that of course destabilized Bosnia for reasons that I'm not going to go into. It's too complicated. And then the United States moved in to just as Germany was sponsoring Croatia, the United States moved in to sponsor Bosnia, partly on the pretext that we are going to demonstrate how we love Muslims, and how we protect Muslims from bad Orthodox Christians, if I may say so.
But what drove that? What drove that?
Well, because they had the United States had already gotten into that in Afghanistan by supporting jihadists against the Russians. So it was a sort of a continuation of I mean, Osama bin Laden was in both of them. It was it was what we want to prove, that even though we support Israel, we also are the champions of the Muslims. And so they made a big thing about, you see, the election, and it's very important that when there was an election in Bosnia in 91, I think it was, as there had been elections in other they never had a Yugoslav election. That's the problem. They had them by peace. And the Muslim who won was a very practical businessman, Fikret Abdic, who had been big, successful in building up the economy of an underdeveloped piece of Bosnia. And he won over 1 million votes. Izetbegovic, Begovic, I mean, this is just the Muslims voting. Abdic got over 1 million votes. Izetbegovic, Begovic, who became the hero of the West, had 800,000 or something, less, in any way, less. And somehow, I don't know why this happened, but Abdic let Izetbegovic take power. And in Bosnia, they were supposed to rotate the leadership between the three nationalities, the Muslims, the Serbs, and the Croats. And Izetbegovic simply stayed there. He had no majority, certainly among Bosnians, and not even among the Muslims. And he just stayed there and was celebrated by the West as this great secular leader of multicultural blah, 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 which is totally untrue because
He was a complete racist.
He was an Islamist who said that, once Muslims are a majority, they should have Sharia law. And this frightened the Serbs. They had lived under that in the past when Turkey was running things, when the Ottoman Empire. And this greatly alarmed the Serbs. They did not want to be subjected to Islamism. And but this was presented to the world as the Serbs being racist. And since a lot of people in the West are pretty are themselves fairly racist against Muslims, they thought, oh, well, that's like us, only worse. but this wasn't even the case. This is a projection, but this is a perfect example of get them to fight, do everything to aggravate. There are latent hostilities there. They can be fixed. They can be cured. There are solutions. You talk to people. You could always find people. I know this particularly about Kosovo because I knew Kosovo better. There were people who were wanting to make peace, who would talk together. And the United States consistently found some way to smash any possibility of people understanding. And you see, if you present the Muslims to themselves as victims, then that makes them more hostile to the Serbs. And the Serbs felt so you get the victim feeling on both sides, and then all hell breaks loose.
The extraordinary thing in Kosovo, going back there when you were there in the 90s, I mean, Kosovo was the first mention of ethnic cleansing was in the 80s, I think, in the New York Times. And the people doing the ethnic cleansing then were the Albanians.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Absolutely. In fact, that's how the memorandum was distorted. I mentioned earlier the Serbian memorandum. They mentioned genocide, but when we were talking about, or ethnic cleansing, I can't remember which term they used, but it was about what the Albanians were doing to the Serbs. It wasn't what the Serbs were about to do to anybody. It was simply recording that. And this was completely lied about. I mean, but you're right. The Western press had recognized in the 80s that it was the Albanians who were trying to push out the Serbs, and the Serbs. I mean, I spent time driving around in Kosovo and talking to people. I had been there. I had spent some time in Peć in the summer of '53. Of course, it was very different because I found that the Serbs weren't there anymore. They had been very largely driven out.
I think in the 70s and the 80s, something like 1.5 million Serbs were expelled by the Albanians. And of course, the Albanians were very cruel to each other, weren't they? I mean, the KLA were bumping off anybody who was just friends with a Serb.
Exactly. So when this Albanian, they called it Kosovars, they gave this phony name of Kosovars to the Albanians there. Started this violent movement. They were assassinating fellow Albanians who were getting along with the Serbs. That's what I mean. It was to prevent any coexistence. And I stayed for a while in the famous monastery of Gachanica and talked to the sisters there. And the sister said, we've been trying to help take care of all these Albanian children, and I got this sort of message from Serbs who were trying to be helpful to the Albanians, and that just.
And yet the Americans and the Germans from 96 on were arming the Albanians and giving them all sorts of support, weren't they? And they knew from CIA reports, I think, that what they were doing was going to provoke more more deaths and make a bad situation into a real catastrophe.
Oh yes, I mean I think it had to be absolutely deliberate. Um, at that time, uh, there for one there was Jan Oberg, who was a peace great, who has this institute in Stockholm. He was sponsoring talks between Serbs and Albanians. The group I knew here was doing that. I knew also a group when in the Green group in even in there was a group. Alexander Langer, who was from um, uh, Südtirol, so he had a feeling about mixing Germans and Italians, and had a sensitivity to ethnic, and he had a group with also with another Austrian who were sponsoring talks, and I was at these talks, and intellectuals came in, Albanian intellectuals, and they were perfectly ready, and the Serbs were perfectly ready to grant all kinds of independence rights. Well, they had all the rights. For one thing, they had all the rights. They prevented the Albanians in Kosovo pretended to be oppressed, and this is totally untrue, totally untrue. And I mean, I saw journalists who came to Pristina and thought that the Albanian language was banned. And there was the Albanian newspapers right there, but they couldn't tell the difference
Yes.
because the newspapers very cunningly sent out young journalists who are going to make a big splash for themselves if they can only find a Serb atrocity to denounce.
Well, this was the whole problem, wasn't it? That if it bleeds, it leads, as they say in the newspaper business. And all these people were out there to find shock horror stories, and they didn't understand the history, the culture, the language. And you must have seen them grappling and just failing to get to the truth of the matter.
Oh no, it is terrible, and they didn't even try. We would come to Pristina, where they were very well treated by a Serbian press center who gave them drinks and desks and all they needed. But the journalists paid no attention. They wouldn't listen to the Serbs. They went out and founded the Albanian public relations thing and
Mm.
got their story from that. And of course, I must say the embassies played a bad role in that, because in Belgrade, the American embassy would send journalists to the same correspondent for Rema. I've forgotten his name, but he was very busy because he would give an anti-Milosevic study. So between being briefed by the embassies and being briefed by the people that the embassies would tell them to be briefed by,
Mm.
they had no idea what was going on. And you see, my approach was completely different because I mean, I would sometimes listen to but basically, I was talking to people. I went around and by chance talked to people and got a completely different view of things. I think it was the Serbs who were afraid of the Albanians, not the other way around. It was perfectly clear.
Do you think there was a degree of conspiracy between the media and I don't know, the intelligence services, or the deep state or somebody? I mean, why did this story just persist, even though we know so much more now about the rape camps didn't exist and all the rest of it? You know, that was some woman from the Croatian Information Service who, told lots of porcupines about things, and we know all of this now, but still the narrative seems to be persisting.
I put a lot of blame on Christian Amanpour.
Yes.
Because she was a very popular journalist for CNN.
Mrs. Jamie Rubin,
And
as for a brief.
that's what I mean. You
Mm,
see, about connections, because she had some connections. Because after all, she ended up marrying Jamie Rubin, who was Madeleine Albright's assistant, and who was the big friend of of the Kosovo leader.
Hasim Chachi, yeah.
Exactly. And so she is so close to power that one can't help but suspecting that her closeness to power is even closer
Yes.
than it obviously already is. And others were just, I mean, you see, the New York Times correspondent who knew Yugoslavia was taken off the story.
David Binder, we're talking about?
Yes, and
Yes.
and here in Paris, the longtime correspondent in Yugoslavia of Humanité of the Communist Party was taken off the story.
Hmm.
I got to know him because I was using they had a library, and I was a library that was easily accessible near where I lived. And I got to know him, and he had me write a story, which he then presented to, and they wouldn't publish it. Even the communists wouldn't.
Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary.
Everybody was going along with the story because it had been so dramatically presented and with so many lies and detailed lies. Uh, it's like you mentioned the rape thing. Now, you know that there was this British woman, Anne Warburton, who had this ridiculous inquiry where they just listened to one side of things and came back and said, oh, they had been mandated not to investigate rapes in Bosnia, but to investigate Serbian rapes. Like
Yeah.
only the Serbs raped. No, Muslims wouldn't do a thing like that. Certainly not the Croats would. No, no, no. And she came back with a totally false report. And Simone Weil, who's probably the most respected woman in France in my time, backed out of that commission because she saw that this was fake. Uh, but does anybody pay attention to that? Certainly not.
I want to get into Racak, if I may,
Oh, yes.
because I thought you'd like to talk about it. And I mean, this is a classic example, isn't it, of a faked, staged massacre that
Absolutely.
is used as the excuse to bomb.
Absolutely.
Tell,
Absolutely.
tell, tell me what your take on Racak is.
Well, you see this UÇK, this Kosovo liberation, this bunch of gangsters who were backed by the CIA, and of course MI6 is always in everything, and the Germans were killing policemen, teachers, killing Albanians who were cooperating with the Serbs, and they performed one of their slaughters of police in southern Kosovo. And the Serbian police undertook a, um, an operation against this base, which was an active Albanian, what they call terrorist, but we can, I don't know what word you call it, but anyway, it, these were rebels that were committing murders. And they announced this operation. It was not a secret in Racak. It was announced that we're going to go in there, and then the Yugoslav authorities announced it, and then they said, you know, we were successful, and so on. And so it was simply a police operation that may have been a bit tough, but police, when their own people are murdered, tend to be rather harsh in their reaction. And then the next day, William Walker, who was an absolutely sinister person, who had been uh, overseeing civil wars in Honduras, of all places, and went in there and put on a big scene about, oh, the bodies. And I wasn't there, but the Moon correspondent was there. And above all, there was the Figaro, veteran Figaro correspondent who is not politically necessarily on my line about anything, but he is a serious journalist. And he was aware of this, of the fact that this was not a slaughter of civilians as it was presented. William Walker presented as a cold-blooded massacre of men, women, and children.
An
And
unspeakable atrocity.
oh yeah, and then Clinton echoed this. They went in and all of this melodramatic stuff, which was, as Renaud Girard said, it was quite simple that this had been a battle over a certain area, and that the survivors had dumped all the bodies in one place, and then Walker comes in and says, "Oh, they were all assassinated there." And actually, when there were finally forensic studies, it showed that they were not shot from close up, that they were shot at a distance. Uh, but that's by the time you get these forensic studies, the results, you don't get them. It's too late because meanwhile, this was taken as the pretext that, oh, we must bomb Serbia to save the Kosovars from genocide.
An
This
appalling distortion. I mean, I remember Clinton saying that there were the men and women and children, and I think there was one woman and child, and the other
exactly
45, as you say, had residue of gunpowder on their hands. They were wearing army boots, and for goodness sake, the Serbs had gone in there with an APTV crew,
yeah,
television crew. So it
exactly.
was not really on the face of it very likely they were going to do that sort of thing.
No, exactly. It was not some. It was a police operation that was announced and covered, but then the lie machine got to work, and then of course Clinton. But this is also interesting because you see, William Walker was there as the head of what they call the Kosovo verification.
Vacation mission, yeah, yeah.
And first of all, that was it shouldn't have been an American in charge of it to begin with. The
Hmm.
Americans took over everything. They had their own mercenaries in that thing. And the moment the bombing started, Walker, this was a verification mission that could see what was happening if they wanted to. And the moment the NATO bombing, he ordered it all out. So there were no observers there. And that's when the German officials and the other officials could come up and say, oh, the Serbs are slaughtering.
Hmm.
There was nobody there were no neutral observers because Walker had taken them out. So, uh, and one or two people complained about that, but it doesn't matter because the news is dominated by the big powers.
And of
Uh,
course, Hasim Tachi had said, hadn't he, on many occasions, this is our deliberate policy to murder Serb policemen because we know we'll get this kind of extreme reaction, which
yeah.
will make the rest of the world say, look at these genocidal maniacs.
Well, yes. You see, if I may say so, uh, this is part of the method. That is to provoke an attack, and then say that the retaliation was totally unprovoked. Well, we
Yes.
have that a bit in Ukraine now. I mean, again, Putin went in with totally unprovoked. Well, you can criticize that as you want, but you can't say it was totally unprovoked. And certainly, Racak was a very deliberate provocation um, to to create an incident that they can use.
So we then have this fake massacre at Racak, followed by the equally fake peace talks at Rambouillet.
Oh yes.
So tell us about the duplicity and mendacity of the Americans in that.
Oh well, I mean, you see, the Serbs came with proposals for actually for a solution, and I say there were lots of people had been talking about solutions. There was oh yes, here there was In Paris, I mentioned some of the groups who were looking for solutions, and one was here in Paris with the wife of Mitterrand. So there was plenty to work with as to solutions. But Madeleine Albright was there to make sure that there would be no such thing. And the reasonable Albanian intellectuals were totally shoved aside, and the U.S. presented this gangster, Taci, as the representative of the Albanians. Now, there were Albanians in the Serbian delegation. Albanians were divided.
Mm.
Because they were divided, I mean, that's why you could get an agreement. But the United States was clear. They were absolutely determined to use this to bomb Yugoslavia, uh, to prove that NATO is the power that decides things.
I think Albright said, didn't she, only a little bombing will make the Serbs see sense.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing she would say, and of course that's where Ruben, her assistant Ruben, and future husband of Amanpour, was saying to Thachi, "You're so handsome, you should be movies." Right? I mean, it's at that level, um, and so that was, and of course, then the Americans came up with a demand that the Serbs would have to allow their whole country to be militarily occupied by NATO troops.
Indefinitely.
And you see, that was absolute. Do you know that's unacceptable? It's totally unacceptable. Your whole and not only that, they would be immune from prosecution. In other words, you could have a foreign army in there. They could rape and murder, but they couldn't be prosecuted.
Mm.
I mean, no government could possibly accept that. And when the Serbs inevitably said no, aha, they don't want peace. They don't want peace.
Mm.
So we have to bomb them. That's why we have to bomb them into peace.
Well, even the abominable Kissinger said that this was just an excuse for bombing, didn't he?
Yeah.
And said that not even the most angelic Serb, I think he said, would have accepted or could have accepted that.
No, nobody could accept a thing like that. It's totally unacceptable. You're asking to give up your country, to just give it up. I mean, especially
Mm.
if you're saying occupied by an army that is immune to prosecution. I mean, they can do anything. This is unspeakable. But they, the U.S. administration was determined to bomb Yugoslavia.
Now, let's talk about why Yugoslavia had to go economically and politically. What was in it for the Americans?
Well, I think a big thing that was in it for the Americans, of course, it was an independent socialist country, but even more than socialist, it was non-aligned. It was part of the neutral world. It was like today what you could say about the multipolar world. It had very good relations, by the way, with Arab countries, and in fact, I think Gaddafi had a Serbian cook at the last. Uh, this was not what United Europe was supposed to be like. You see, a country that had good relations with the third world. There was this feeling in Washington then that triumphalism. We've won the Cold War. We can do what we want. Europe is now completely controlled by NATO, and we don't want anything that would be a different. No outsiders are allowed, right?
Mhm.
And everybody must be in the club, and that was something that I heard Italians saying because they didn't agree with the United States, but they want to be in the club. They want to be in the club. There's a winners club, and you want to be.
Hmm.
And Yugoslavia was what was didn't fit in. It didn't fit in the Europe that the U.S. intended to. So in fact, they destroyed it, and I mean they destroyed that country because what's left is a bunch of pieces. Most of them, except little Slovenia, is such a paradise. It comes out on top anyway, but it's very small, and everybody else has suffered from that.
Except people like Albright herself and Wesley Clark, who
Oh yes.
invested heavily in
Oh
the
yes.
spoils of
Oh, yes.
Yugoslavia.
The Americans won. But I mean,
Yeah.
the people of Yugoslavia all
Oh,
lost, except I said the
yeah,
Slovenians, because
absolutely.
Slovenia is sort of a piece of the beautiful Alps, etc. But, and not that many people. But most of the people have suffered terribly from that and are still suffering and still not free at all. And the U.S. built its instantly. I mean, the moment they forced Milosevic to give in, simply not because he was defeated militarily, because there were never any fights. There were never any fights. I think the Serbs fight well, but they knew they were just being bombed and couldn't
Hmm.
stop that. And they would be, rather than have everything wiped out by NATO bombing, they they gave in, and instantly the United States started building this huge military base in Kosovo.
Bond steel, huge. Yes.
No, I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, days later, did they go through any procedure? Did they ask permission either of the Serbs who were still legally in charge or of their Albanian puppets? Did they to have the right to take this land to
Hmm.
themselves and build this huge base? No, they just did it. It's extraordinary.
Was part of this also what went wrong with? I mean, I've heard that the chap who was running the CIA Soviet desk said that it was at this point that Putin lost. I mean, with the bombing of Kosovo and Yugoslavia generally was where Putin finally decided the West could not be trusted. They'd had all the verbal promises in earlier years that nothing would be,
Wait,
extend
it wasn't Putin there.
towards the East.
But it was no, it was Yeltsin who was in charge.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, but the reason Putin doesn't trust the West now is because of the Kosovo bombing.
Well, that's a good reason because that it proved that their perfidious nature, if I may say so.
Yes,
Uh, how can you trust them? They lie, they cheat, they cause provocations, they don't keep their deals, they break. No, I mean, uh, and they call this the rules-based order, and there's no rules at all. The rules they make up this morning.
they've just torn everything up, haven't they? The whole basis, of sovereign territory and all the rest of it is all of these rules, as you say, have been scrapped, and of
Yeah.
course, it's all been made to seem okay by the International Tribunal. The
Oh,
criminal tribunal. Now that is sort of adjudicated on everything apart from NATO crimes, and it's just sort of solidified the whole official narrative, hasn't it?
well, I must say, I find the whole decline of of judicial institutions to be dreadful. I mean, if I may digress just a moment, in the United States in recent years, you have this phenomenon of lawfare, of using the law for political revenge on both sides, both
Hmm.
uh, and I see it happening in Europe. Using the law for vengeance, for political aims, and they're completely undermining the whole concept of a legal order. And of course, certainly this Yugoslav tribunal was totally biased. It was set up to judge the Serbs against the others. It's obvious. And I think the International Tribunal has the same. I was always the problem with an international tribunal is if you have a tribunal, I've said this before, if you have a tribunal, you have to have a police. You have to have you can't have and the police is NATO. I mean, you're not going to prosecute anybody that NATO doesn't want you to prosecute. And so there isn't a real and certainly the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, was set up and run entirely with the intention of putting all the guilt on the Serbs. And of course, you mentioned before that they were never able to they arrest Milosevic. You see, there was all these lies. Speaking of lies, there were all the lies about Milosevic. He was not a dictator. He did not control all the media, not at all. He was had a coalition government. All of this was just you just say he's a dictator, blah blah blah, and everybody's supposed to believe it.
But yet Richard Holbrooke had said that he had helped enormously in peace at Dayton.
Exactly, because Milosevic wanted peace, and he so much that Holbrooke had to bring him in to Dayton to sort of force the Bosnian Serbs to. And what was his reward? Did the U.S. then lift the sanctions against Serbia? No. Instead, they started arming the Kosovars against Serbia. So again, this was absolutely treacherous because Holbrooke used Milosevic. He used his good intentions of Milosevic to get his very flawed Bosnia agreement, which is a terrible thing, by the way, but never mind. And then betrayed him. So how can you make deals with people like this?
He just called the tribunal a huge, useful tool, didn't he? That's what Holbrooke said of it, and that's precisely what it was.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. It was just a tool to use on one side. And you see, this has never stopped. And I must say, when I see the way the world is going, if only Yugoslavia, if only large numbers of people could understand Yugoslavia, they'd understand a lot more. But unfortunately, we're a long way from that because it is so ingrained in the official version of the West.
Well, this is what I wanted to sort of, if we draw to a close in a way, to ask your thoughts about how we can effectively, we can't relitigate this. What can we do? How do we go on most effectively telling the truth?
Yeah, that is the big question. And I'm not for. I've seen these trial things. There's the Brussels tribunals. That you have these Brussels tribunals. You have that, and that's very nice. But I think this whole tribunal business is kind of poisoned. I of course, since I'm not an armed group, the only way I can ever fight for anything is verbally, right? And so I wish, I was active in the Vietnam War, but in the idea of teach-ins, of really getting maybe doing what Charlie Kirk was doing.
Yes.
I mean, not in the same line, but I mean, somehow doing educational projects for younger people and students and so on, because I think that the lies about Yugoslavia are poisonous even today to what is happening. I think it's very important, and maybe if one could get enough, I don't know, because at my age, I can't do very much.
But I sense you have an underlying optimism, and that, I think you ended your memoir saying that life is full of surprises.
Yes, you're right. You're right. I think that's maybe it's because I have a naturally uh, happy temperament, because the world is not giving me any good signals.
Do you think that we'll survive Trumpism and the whole sort of fake news and all that kind of thing?
Actually, today I'm very worried, just from the actual news of today. But we're talking about Yugoslavia, but today,
Mm.
the 17th of October 2025, I'm very worried about the way things are going. I mean, in the Middle East as forever, but now Venezuela, Ukraine. I mean, it's and they even. I mean, they're even these idiots who want to make war against China of all things. I mean, I feel that the ruling class is I don't know if to say incompetent, evil, what they crazy. It's just so unreasonable. That's the problem that I and my friends have, is that uh, we don't see much. We see dwindling space for reason, and of course, I've always depended on reason and truth.
President Carter called America the most warlike nation on earth. He said that, since 1776, I think there've barely been a dozen years when the country hasn't been at war. Do you? They seem to make enemies and just perpetually go from war to war to war. Do you
Yeah,
think they will ever change their mind and accept that we have a multipolar world now, and it does pay perhaps to cooperate with people?
there's no sign that they'll do that. I don't see any sign that they'll do that. I don't see any opposition with the breadth or to do that. But of course, there are signs here and there of people who disagree with all this. But it's I yes, I like to be optimistic, and as you say, because I'm always hoping for good surprises. But anything good at this point would be pretty much of a surprise, I must admit. Uh, but I just recently had my first great grandchild,
Oh, congratulations.
and if I think of her future,
Well, you've done an awful lot to try and make it better. Thank you very much for talking to us.